as I mentioned in my previous video or previous clip, I'm remeasuring and reassessing the closing shims on the vertical cylinder head. And so I found that although I thought they were in spec before, both of these exhaust and intake sides they had a bit more than 0.05 millimeters. And we're trying to be less than that. That's the best clearance. So I think I was just at or above it on both. So what I'm trying to do essentially is just put in some bigger shims and see if I can close up that gap. So that's what I'm doing now. I just tried, let's see, it was in there before. It was a, what is this, a 2.65. I just tried a 2.7, which I had from one of the other ones. That still had a bit of a gap, although I only had one half ring in there because I didn't want to go through the hassle of putting the other one on just to measure and find out it wasn't great. So I'm going to try the 2.75. And then if that one seems to be better, I'll just stick with that. So that's a full, that's a full 0.1 millimeter up. So if that's not good, then I'd be surprised. So we'll try putting this 2.75 in and see how it goes. Okay, so here's a perfect example of what I mentioned earlier. I got one half ring in there, and usually when you can see it kind of clearly like that, you know, as opposed to those that are like more buried, it's not on right. And I can tell because when I put the opening shim on top like that, and the opening rocker arm is at a place where it moves back and forth perfectly smooth like that, no resistance. So that's where you should be putting it on. But when I put the opening shim on, and then I use this method where I use this tool to just push ever so slightly down on top of the opening shim like that, and then pull the opening rocker arm over on top of it. But when I do that, it doesn't go. It won't move over. This is just locked here and it won't move. So I know that something's not right, because when it is right, it doesn't really take much force at all to move it back over. So I gotta just mess with that half ring and get it to sit right, because it's not right now. Okay, so with one half ring, the 2.75 there seemed actually too tight. I don't even think there was any difference at all. When I was measuring, I couldn't get anything bigger than a 1.3 in with no load, and then even with load it was the exact same. I also couldn't really move the shim with my fingers, so that might be too tight. I'm going to make sure by just putting the other half ring in first and then remeasuring, and if it's still just too tight, then I just go half down, even though that didn't seem like it was perfect. It seemed like it was still a little too big at the 2.70. That's more within spec. Obviously I'd rather be perfect, but I can't have no movement whatsoever, I don't think. I mean, I don't know. It says 0 to 0.05, you know, so there should just be a little bit of movement. If there's none, I feel like that's more of a problem just because things are so tight, which I wouldn't want. I mean, obviously, like, I don't know. I mean, obviously, if it was okay being that tight, then they would just say, like, make it so it doesn't move or something like that, but they don't say that. So I think too tight is not a good thing. Okay, upon further review, I have the 2.75 still in there with both half rings all set basically, and I can't get anything bigger feeler gauge wise in there, so it's like either ever so slightly just bigger than the 1.3 or whatever. It's either like so marginal of a gap, or there is no gap and it's super tight. But then when I use the tool, I can only seem to do this with this tool. When I use this to push down on the rocker arm and just try to get my fingers around the shim to push it, if I really push, like, it takes a lot of effort, but if I really do, I can move the shim. It feels like it is moving ever so slightly. So there is somewhat of a gap in there. I mean, there's not much oil in there either, so it's not super greased up or anything by any means, but I've decided I don't really want to leave that shim where it is. It just feels too tight, and when rotating the engine by hand, it does feel like there's either a little bit of resistance or binding when I kind of get to that valve. So what I'm going to do is put the 2.70, so one shim size down on there, and then put new half rings. So I mean, that'll be good in the sense that the half rings will just be fresh, but because they do wear down over time and kind of get seated, I will have to keep that in mind, that at the next valve check interval, whatever, those half rings may have been seated and the gap may have grown, and so I would need to put in the 2.75 or possibly a bigger one. We'll see. But yeah, I'm gonna give that a shot. I feel like that might be the good happy medium for the clearance that I need, and then hopefully we'll be good from there. Okay, I think we found that winner on the intake vertical shim. So I put the 2.70, I believe. Yeah, the 2.70 closing shim with new keepers, new half rings, and I can just get like one additional size in there. So with no pushing on it, the 1.3 doesn't go in. The 1.0 does, and then when pushing on it, the 1.3 goes in. The 0.15 is what I meant to say. 0.13 goes in. The 0.15 does go in, but it's very tight, and the 0.18 won't unless you literally shove it in there. But yeah, so I think that's good. It clearly moves with my fingers when I push on it, so it's not like it's bound up in there. And when spinning the engine in particular, there really doesn't seem to be any like place where it's really getting stuck. There's some points where there's more pressure, but it was always like that, and it just kind of moves more freely. So yeah, I think we're good. So we're using the old 2.7 in there with new rings, and we will move on to the exhaust side now. All right, so working on the vertical exhaust cylinder head. This one is a real pain. Unfortunately, when I get the tool in there to pry the closing arm down, it's hitting this piece of plastic right here, this casing. So I can try to move this around and just create more space there, but it's still such a tight like just area that to get 2 or 3 hands in there is going to be so hard. Also, if I were to move this thing, I need to cut zip ties here, and yeah, I don't know, it's just gonna it sounds like it's gonna be a big pain. So I may, I don't know, think of alternatives. But anyways, I did push it down, push the rocker arm down with this, and it just flung right back at me, so it just doesn't feel safe to use that. Although I could potentially, but while doing that, I was able to magnet off one of the half rings. I have one over there. The other one's still on. I'll keep it on for now, but yeah, I'm definitely gonna need a full, like 2 sizes up, maybe even 3, in order to get that into the right spec. And we'll just have to see how we can get in there easier, because it really is a pain right now. But yeah. All right, working on trying to remove this closing shim in the vertical exhaust cylinder head. I did purchase what I hope is the right size, a 3.15 closing shim. It's a 2.9 in there right now, so it's a 0.25 millimeter difference, which is huge. But that's what I measured, so I'm hoping that's right. If not, it might be a 3.10 shim, maybe with new keepers, new half rings. So we'll see. Gonna give this one a shot first. So I'm gonna see what I can do to remove like this bolt here, and maybe this bolt right here, to move this like battery electrical housing. if it doesn't move, then I don't really know what else to do. I might just need to push it down with this and have my wife help me to get it off. So we'll see. I'm just gonna see if I can move this. I really don't want to cut all these zip ties to like completely get it out of the way, you know, if I don't have to. So yeah, we're gonna start with just removing a couple bolts here and then see what moves. So getting rid of this bolt here and then this one on this side lets it move a little, like there's a little play, but it doesn't completely come out because everything's zip tied. Okay, so with just some messing around, I think I can actually use this tool and just kind of put it a bit deeper in than it's supposed to be, but there's still just enough of something to grab onto the closing rocker arm to where I can start it, basically. So I'm not gonna screw this back in. I'll just keep it as it is. I'm just gonna use that tactic for now to try and get things going, and then I may be able to like move it around and do it better later once the shim's off. But yeah, we'll see. I'll kind of just see what works best as I go, since this is such a weird spot. Okay, so I just got the 3.20 closing shim on down there. So we're gonna measure while it's on and see if it's the right fit. Okay, so I think that is the right size. I could barely even, like when I pushed it down with the depressor tool, I could barely get any bigger size feeler gauge in there. So since when it's that minuscule, my test is just to see if I can push it down and twist, like spin the shim, just to see if there's any sort of gap there. And I basically can't finger spin the shim when there's no pressure, and then when I push down I can, although there's a little bit of resistance. I mean, there's a good amount of resistance. It doesn't spin freely, but it spins. So I mean, there is a gap. So it's between 0 and 0.05. So there is a gap. So I'm gonna say that's good. It's just on the tighter side, so I'll have to just keep an eye on it in the future. But I like that. So yeah, that was good. I did the video kind of explaining what I did with all the other ones. So this is the vertical exhaust side valve head, and the closing shim is using the same like the existing O-ring, half rings, O-rings, whatever you call them, keepers. So not new ones. And the shim is a new from Ducati, 3.20. That, yeah, replaced the original in there. Okay, so we're all measured and we're all good. Yeah, gonna move on now to kind of like buttoning things up. So this will be the end of the video, most likely. We're good, just on shims, and so we're going to be buttoning everything up, doing just some last things like just changing the oil and just, yeah, kind of giving everything a one-over before we put everything back together, and then we'll see if it starts. That'll be it. All right, catch you in the next one.